everyone, my name's Gabriella Buckingham. I am a full-time artist and teacher of Braid in Paint courses, and you can find out all about those if you go to braidinpaint.com, and you can see my own work at gabriellabuckingham.com, as well as obviously anything that I show you here. But today I'm here to show you how I frame my work. I've got a few small ones to frame to go into a show this week. So I thought I'd share with you exactly how I do it, so you can pick up some tips, or maybe you can see where you could do something a bit differently. Usually I do it myself. It's quite rare that I would actually ask somebody to frame something for me. And that is partly because I used to have a wonderful framer called Jim. Jim, on the very small chance that you might be watching this, I miss you. So I'll just show you what I've got on my desk before I show you the details. So one of the most important things for me is a tablecloth. It doesn't have to be a white one, it doesn't have to be pristine clean, but just something soft to put over your table so that you are protecting the wood of your frames. So in addition to that, obviously if you've got a very large, this is a bit overexposed, hang on. Now if you've got a very large painting that you want to frame, then you'll need a large ruler, and you'll see why in a little while, although I'm not going to frame a large piece. But I've also got a short ruler, and whatever I do with this on my little frames, with regard to my small paintings, is what I would do on a large piece as well. So bear that in mind when we come to it. I've got my quite wide masking tape, and this is absolutely vital, and you'll see why. I've obviously got a few paintings, so I'm just going to be using smaller pieces today. These are part of an exhibition called Small in Chroma at the Point Gallery, and that's what I'm getting ready for. And I've also got my automatic screwdriver, and very importantly of course, my Bosch drill. The Bosch PSB 600 RPE. And as you can see, it has this all-important measuring stick on the side. The numbers themselves don't matter, but why it's important is, and I have to press this to be able to make it move, I have to press this side part and then push this like that. Why that matters is that when you come to actually drill the hole for your screw, you need, and you've got your drill bit here, the drill bit's in there. I'm just going to rest it there for a second just to show you. You line up the drill bit with the screw, and then you take your screw away, and that way when you hit this, when you're pressing this into your wooden frame, you know when to stop, because you do not want to come right through to the front of the painting. And I put my very essential countersink tool into this. This is the countersink tool. This is what you use at the end of your drill to create a circular dent almost in your wood, and then you take the drill bit into that and it just eases the way in for the drill bit, and then you get a really neat flush area for your screws to go into, and you'll see me do that. And I also put my 2mm drill bit into that as well, because my screws are just slightly wider than that. They're probably 2.5, so you want to have the drill bit just slightly smaller than your actual screw, so that it goes in and it really grips. So you can imagine if you've got a hole that's too big, then it's not going to grip at all. So that's right. Obviously, if you've got a very thick canvas and a very large canvas, then you could use a longer screw. But it's always important to check the depth of your painting, because you don't want the situation, and I had this once where I had quite a shallow piece of wood and the screw came through to the front. Luckily I did notice in time, so it was a very tiny hole that I was able to fill and then paint over, but that was very upsetting. And a pencil, which I use when I'm using the ruler, funnily enough. Oops, totally forgot to brush my hair this morning. I've also got my screws. I have a tin that I actually keep this in. This is just a Black & Decker screwdriver, automatic screwdriver. It's not a really powerful one, but I find as long as you've got self-tapping screws, and here I'm thinking about doing shows, if I've got this and I've got the right kind of screw, then this does go very easily into the plasterboard that they provide for most shows. And I found it absolutely perfect for framing my work as well. So I've got lots and lots of screws in here, so I just ferret around and find the ones I need. And I've also got some Velcro dots. Sometimes I need those, and you'll see an instance where I do. Most times I don't use them, and that's where the masking tape comes in. So it will all become clear when I actually show you some framing. Just trying to think, is there anything else that I need? Ah yes, brown tape. I do have one painting here, this one, which is on an A4 piece of wood that I'm going to frame in a more traditional way. It actually goes very neatly into this frame here, and I'll put it in the back. But I'm not actually going to frame this now because I need to go and buy some more brown tape. As you can see, I had something else in here at some point, and now I need to reframe that. There is a tool that I haven't yet invested in. This is an example that I found of a tool like this on the Jackson's Art website. It fires little horizontal pieces of metal. Sounds absolutely terrifying, doesn't it? They're tiny pieces of almost like an arrow shape, but slightly chunkier, that would slide just between the piece of wood and straight into the frame. And then you would cover that with the brown tape. I found that this stays in perfectly well because it's not inclined to fall out anyway. So a good strong tape that's suitable for framing is enough to hold this in, and this is perfectly fine for this particular piece. So I'm going to set up my table with my white cloth. This is the painting Tangerine Dream that I'm going to demonstrate framing for you. As you can see, I've written the title in a couple of different places because actually all of this gets hidden when it's framed. I've got a tray frame here I'm going to be using, and I hand painted this in a light grey, and as you can see it's very simple. This is the colour of the wood before it's painted, and sometimes depending on the painting I'll leave it like that and then I'll varnish it with a kind of a wax finish. So the first thing I do with a little painting like this, and in fact a big one, is I just place it inside and I try to get it as even as I can around the edge so that the gap is the same all the way around. And this is where the tape comes in handy. It's the frog tape for the delicate surfaces. It does reassure me that I'm not going to be taking the paint off. And I would do this on a large painting just as much as I would a small one. And then I gently press it onto the painting, bearing in mind this painting has been varnished, so it should be absolutely fine, and it's been dry for a long time now, a couple of weeks at least. And I do this and I wrap it round so that when I gently turn it over, it will stay in the same place. Obviously I've attached a little bit to the tablecloth, but that's fine. So I'm just making sure that those little bits of tape go around the edge, and I can feel it moving slightly, but it should keep it fairly straight, in fact very straight. If you're worried at all, turn it round and double check. Now that looks to me a little bit like this is a little bit bigger at the top than the bottom, so I'm going to redo that because I am a bit of a perfectionist in that way. If you're going to have a slightly bigger gap, then you'll want the bigger gap to be at the bottom. So off we go again. So the next thing I need to do is make a mark where I want my holes to go for the screws, bearing in mind that when you put the fixings on, these little things here, and you've got those two little screws, when you put the fixings on, for most paintings you want them to be about a third down, so those are going to go there. So I don't want to make my holes to fix the painting just here. I tend to do it when it's a small painting like this. I've learned that just doing 2 screws is actually enough. It keeps it still. If it's any bigger than this, say 8 by 10, then I would do 4 screws. I'd do 1 in the centre there, 1 in the centre there, and 2 in the centre here. So all I'm going to do is make a little pencil mark, just as something, as a guide as to where I'm going to drill for the wood screws that are going to fix the frame through to the painting. So you can see where the frame is just directly under here. This is actually really quite neat. It really fits this frame very well, so I can see exactly where it is, and I know that the painting is about that wide, so I don't want to put a screw here. I want to make sure it's nearer, and I think about there, which is 12 millimeters in, is fine. So just go across to the other side and mark that there, because on the countersink tool there's a little point just here, and that's what I'm going to drill over the top like that. So this is my drill, and I need to make sure that this is wide enough for this to go in, and it isn't at the moment. So what I need to do is press here and then turn this to the left hand side, and you can just about see, I know it's slightly out of focus, that this is getting wider. Will it go in yet? No, not quite. Nearly. Not quite. You can see it's quite wide, that hole. That's too wide, so I'll go back the other way. It's important to make it only just bigger than the actual tool, because then you get this in the centre, and it's important to get it in the centre so that you get an even drill. Okay, that's in nicely. So at this point I'm going to tighten it up, and I wait till it sort of clicks. There we are. Now this is the noisy part. When I first tried this, it wasn't working. This red part has to be in. My son's used this since I last used it, so that is why. So let's go. So I'm just leaning over and lining up the bottom with that little pencil mark. So there is a lot of wood dust, and let me just have a look. I don't know if I've done enough for that. So the way to tell is have a look and see if the screw sits nicely in it, and it doesn't quite. It's not quite. I didn't quite leave it long enough. Sometimes I do this for too long, and then I end up with quite a big, wide hole, which is not as professional looking. It's just one of those things that comes with practice. A little bit longer. So the next side. That looks ever so slightly bigger, I think. But it's really slight, and in fact that's not on neither side, is it really quite big enough, I don't think. Just give it one more little blast. So that's enough for that, I think. And then I have to bear in mind this is quite hot now because it's been rubbing so hard against that wood. So do be careful. So press in and then loosen. I always remember my husband saying righty tighty, lefty loosey. And as you can see, it's getting quite wide. I just gingerly take it out. It's quite hot. And then I'm going to close the hole to make it much, much smaller, because I've only got a 2mm drill bit to go in there. There we are. And then I'm going to tighten that up, just check it's central. And really tighten it so it clicks. I think that's okay. I'm just going to check it. Yep, that's fine now. I just want it to go through here and into the wood enough that this screw will fix into it. So to do that, I need to put my hand on this little piece here to push to loosen this, so that I can then line up the screw with the top of the drill bit. So that's about right. So the way I do this now is rest that right in the middle, get it as vertical as possible, and then when this part hits the wood, that's when I stop. But also I'm going to keep the drill going the whole time as I pull it out as well, so that we get a nice smooth transition. I'm just going to turn this around now, just so it's a bit easier for me to do. I'll do the same on the other side. Now interestingly, on this side I heard a sort of clunk as this went through from this wood into the next, but I didn't really hear it on this side, so I'm just going to double check it actually went through properly. Because very occasionally you hit knots in the actual painting and sometimes they just don't want to go through, but that's very rare. So I'm just going to blow this and get the dust out before I then put the screws in. And usually when I do that I close my eyes, and you could of course wear eye goggles if you're really worried about wood dust. So the next stage is to screw this in. I just need this screwdriver. At the moment it's set to pull screws out, so I want to flip it over to that side, and then again hold it directly over and gently press down. So that's gone in nicely, and I'm pleased with that finish of that. It's sort of pretty much flush to the wood, so that's good. That's what I wanted. And then the other side, maybe a little bit more. That's not quite as low down, but it's good enough. And then I'm just going to take it away and blow it, get rid of all that dust, and then I definitely did close my eyes. And then you can peel off the tape. Okay, so for the back, what I do is I would turn it over and measure. I usually do a double thread like that, and bearing in mind I'm going to be tying it as well, so I'll probably make a piece of string that I want about that long. Now the thing with this type of cord that always comes with the frames that I order is that it can fray really quickly. So what I usually do is I find a sharp pair of scissors or a scalpel, cut it, and then I take it to my gas cooker and I singe it. You can see the problem. So when you singe it, it essentially melts these fibres, which are plastic, I guess. So it creates a seal so that it doesn't fray anymore. So that's what I'm going to go and do. Something else you're going to need is an awl. And this is so that you can make little holes in wood when you're finishing off your painting and you're putting in the fixings. Mine has actually snapped off at the end because I was far too vigorous once and obviously had trouble getting it out, but it's still usable because it's a small enough end. You could also use the end of a compass, that sort of thing would work, or even if you're desperate, the end of a big screw, because let's face it, those are really pointy and they would make quite a nasty a nasty hole if you pressed hard. So I've singed the cord and I've got a couple of little eyelets here and 2 much smaller screws to fix those on with. This lot came in a kit with a frame that I ordered. So you can see that if you leave it a little bit too long, it goes quite dark, and quite often I have black ends. That one's pretty near perfect, with it only being a pale creamy colour. But there's no way now that those will fray. They're perfectly stable like that. So this is the next bit where you will need your ruler or just even a book would do, to make sure that your eyelets are level. So if I do one first, it's probably the best way. So what I tend to do is put the screw in and just rest, in fact, no, that way around. You can see some of these have a little bump like that, and then they're flat on the other side. So what I like to do is have the little bump side going down into the gap to try and keep the back of the painting as flat as possible. That isn't always possible because some fixings supplied seem to have the bumpy part on both sides. So it just depends on what you have. So I am just going to make a little mark with this, digging the little screw in. Then I'm going to get my awl, and you can see where that mark is, and I'm just going to make it bigger like that and push quite hard as if I'm screwing into this wood, and there we go. I can see quite a large hole. So now this is the point where I will then go and make a corresponding mark over the side, and I don't measure this, I'll just do it by eye, just so that I know what I'm aiming at, and that saves me having to do the faffy bit with the screw and the fixing. So then I'll just get my awl and aim for that little mark. This is quite soft wood, so it does go in easily, and because you're just using a small screw, you don't really need to go that far. And then I'm just going to see if this is actually, some of these little crosshead pieces on these tiny screws are a little bit too small for this drill, but I think that does just fit, which is handy. Right, so I'm going to make sure I have the bumpy part facing downwards, put that in and rest that there. This is always a bit fiddly, and then get this directly overhead and screw it down. You could of course have a little manual screwdriver around, and I do have one like this. It's just a lot harder to turn it, and this might have been out of a cracker or something. So if you ever get a Christmas cracker present like that, keep it, because it will become useful. It's good if you can keep it as upright as possible. That went a little awry. I might actually try this and see if it's better. Yeah, it is. Now I've got it in some of the way, but you can see it's a much more laborious process. I'm really pressing hard and the table is bouncing up and down, but that's in enough. It does still move, but that's okay. That doesn't really matter. Let's see if I can get it a little bit tighter. It doesn't matter at all, because obviously once you're hanging a painting you just adjust it accordingly. But it's a really good idea to try to get these fixings the same height, because when you're hanging work in a gallery they often have the stas system, and you make it much easier for yourself when the hooks go through these, if they are absolutely identical in height, because then you'll be able to get the hooks to line up to each other, and then they'll just slot in without you having to adjust the hooks up and down. Right, so with this. As you can see here, I did actually make the string a little bit too long, but I'm just going to knot it several times because these are slippery little things and they're prone to coming undone. So even 4 times, and I'll just pull it really hard, and then I can just tuck it down there. So when it's in a gallery, importantly, some galleries will have hooks and you'd hang it on there, but you don't want it to meet this part because then obviously you may as well just hang it on the wood, and this is much safer to hang it on this. So there we have it, one framed painting. Now, there's another type of painting that is much more tricky to find a frame for, and that is this sort of painting, where you've just got a thin piece of wood, and much like, where's the one I've got here? And there's the traditional way to frame a piece like this is something like this. I mean, obviously you don't need glass, but you're going to crop in to your painting, which I have here, but I knew that was the case and I like how it looks, so that's fine with me. But I'll show you one of my solutions. So if you've only got tray frames and budget is tight, then this is a way to do it. You probably recognise what these are. They are the, I don't actually know what they're called, but they are the little wooden pieces that you tighten a canvas with at the back, and you sort of hammer them in and it stretches the canvas. So what I've done is I've glued these together with PVA glue and then super glued them onto the wood, and then I put Velcro on the top. So what I need to do now is put the opposite Velcro on there, peel it off, and then just place this on top. Now this is slightly raised from the frame, so from the side the edge is going to show. I don't mind that, I quite like it in fact, because it sort of highlights the actual painting, and I like the idea of there being a contrast of colour, but in some cases you might really want to keep it lower. Obviously these are all different thicknesses and you just need to work out what you're happy with and do the sums according to the fixings that you happen to have around. And the other alternative, of course, is just to buy some kind of mount board, foam core, something like that, that you glue onto the inside. I think this is nicer because you can still see the back of the painting, even though there's not an awful lot of information there. That's how I deal with this type of painting, or I do it the way I've just shown you with a traditional frame. So with this one, I'm going to be using a little frame like this, a grey one, and I'm going to do exactly that so that it sits just inside or just above. So I'm going to go away and work out what I need. There is another way that I frame a piece like this, but I think that particular one is a little bit too small for this, and I'm just going to get one off the wall. It's an intuitive landscape, and you can see here that the image itself is set in a little well, if you like, that's actually built into the frame. It's called a slab frame. So you can see here that you can simply Velcro your painting into this well, which is a fantastic idea. I think this is a really lovely solution. This particular width, though, for something this small is slightly overkill, I think. So that's why I'm going to be using this type of frame for this one. I hope you found that helpful and you're feeling really confident about framing your own work. Obviously, the smaller it is, the easier it is, but I do use exactly the same process as this. For something like this, I use more tape, and I might put some tape here and here as well as the corners to really try to make sure that it doesn't move when I turn over the canvas in its larger frame. And for something like this, I would still just use 4 screws, but probably a little bit longer than the ones I've shown you. Again, it really depends on how deep the canvas is and how chunky the frame is as well. That's why this is really, really important. Okay, have a good week. Bye.